Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. I'm coming to you from beautiful Nashville, Tennessee, where the sky is hopefully going to hold out just a little bit longer. It's a chilly out here at an undisclosed location outside of Nashville, but back home in Atlanta is the fearless Abe Gordon. We have a tremendous week of college football action here ready for you. We're going to break it all down. It's rivalry week. It is my favorite week of the season, Abe. I know it is very high on your list too, but how you doing, buddy? We got a lot to get into.
Undisclosed location. What are you staying at, a safe house? I mean, what's going on over there, man?
You never know. You never know. I'm peeking over my shoulder every now and then. I'm in the middle of a little square area, and there are people walking around. They're looking at me like I'm crazy, but this is college football.
You are crazy. I'll hit up my guy, Rain Bolt, and he'll tell me exactly where you are, and then we'll go from there.
There you go. There's the guy on TikTok who likes to identify where somebody is based off of just like little key indicators. Hopefully there's nothing over here. I think I'm in the clear. I got like a little art studio over there. It's just probably the most interesting place I've done a podcast from. But you know what? It's rivalry week, and that's why it's so important. But let's jump right over there to the Lone Star State, Texas at Texas A&M. This is one of the most important games of the college football season, at least of the college football week. This game is so exciting. It's so important. And it's important to these two fan bases. It's important to the SEC. So you talk about this game specifically. We'll break down the game in just a second, but let's talk about the ramifications of what this game could mean first. Texas A&M, Texas, both of these two teams are on the outside looking in currently of the SEC championship, but this is a de facto semifinal. Not like the Pac-12, or not the Pac-12, the Big 12 was saying last week where it's a de facto Big 12 championship game. It turns out there are tons of other tiebreakers. No, the winner of this game is going to move forward and play Georgia for the SEC championship game. It is a critical matchup. But then you talk about just the rivalry aspect of it. This is a pair of squads who have not faced off since Texas A&M left the Big 12 for the SEC back in 2012. It's been a little while, and these two teams hate each other. There are lots of matchups in the game that are going to be very exciting and to talk about. But as far as just what this game means to these fan bases and then the SEC and college football as a whole, I'm very, very excited for the nightcap on ABC on Saturday.
Yeah, well, a couple things jump out at me. And I know you can sit here and tell me that these two teams hate each other and there's a long-standing blood feud. And I don't disagree with you. But I think sometimes you have games that mean more because it's just about that rivalry. And this game oversteps that. It's no longer just about the rivalry in this year's instance because there is such a bigger step forward on the opposing side of this. And so I think you almost step away from the rivalry and put what's really at stake in this game. It's not bragging rights. Bragging rights, sure, you can have those if you want. What's really at stake is an opportunity to find a bid into the SEC title game. And the big question for me when it comes to Texas, what is the status of Quinn Ewers? I know they've been very hush-hush on his ankle injury and what's going on there. Is he going to play? How close to 100% is he? How close to 100% does he need to be? Because if Texas A&M is going to play the way that they looked last week against Auburn, especially in that first half, Arch Manning might be good enough to get it done. But then there's the question of you are stepping into Kyle Field. You are stepping into one of the biggest, largest, and loudest stadiums in all of college football. And they know what this game means, both in terms of the rivalry and then, as I mentioned, in terms of it's your only way in. I mean, Texas at least has a fallback. Texas has a decent shot to lose and still get into the college football playoffs, right? Texas A&M has one road. That's it. They have to win this game. They have to beat Georgia. Any other thing happens, they're not getting in. So they are going to be shouting and screaming at the top of their lungs because, quite frankly, over the next couple of games, a college football playoff berth is on the line for Texas A&M. The matchups are going to be interesting, but the one thing we do know, A&M has got to get more out of their passing offense than what they've gotten in recent weeks. They have to step that aspect of their game back up. You are not going to beat Texas just with a running quarterback. And so we're gonna see if they can perform and be a little more amped up. Some would say that last week against Auburn was a trap game situation and they fell into it. Or is there just inconsistency on their level of play? And then on the other side, I guess we finally get to answer that question that people have thrown at us all year long, Garrett, about Texas and just how good are they? We
Yeah.
saw them fail the one test they had against the Georgia Bulldogs. Just how good is this team? And they'll get an opportunity to play a top 20 team on the road in this one. And so maybe they can answer a couple of those questions.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing you mentioned. One of the last things you said there. It's the road. They haven't been good that good on the road. You had the game against Michigan early in the season where you just sort of jumped out early in that game and put the nail in the coffin on the Wolverines and effectively their season. It seems like, but that we've learned since. Excuse me. That's just not a very good football team up there in Ann Arbor. So they score 12 points in that game. You score 31. And it seems like you're on a roll now. And then you start cooking through that schedule. But then you play every single game at home up until you play Vanderbilt. And that was 5 consecutive weeks at home. And that included the blowout loss that you had to Georgia. And yes, 15 points is a blowout loss when you're playing between two top 5 teams and you are playing at home. So, yes, it's a blowout loss, first off. But then you go on the road and you play a ranked Vandy squad in Nashville, beautiful Nashville, I might say. And look, you're not very effective in that game. You struggle a little bit. And then you come back home, you play Florida, like a Florida team without DJ Lagway. And then you go back on the road and you struggle again. That game against Arkansas. So is it a trend that you're just not very effective on the road in the SEC? You'll have to buck that trend early in this game. And the thing is about Kyle Field and places like that, especially in the SEC, when you are playing in those games and you talk about all the things that happen on paper, right? If I had any paper, I'd wiggle it in front of your face. The game isn't played on paper, and there are 100,000 screaming fans that are going to be in that arena with you. And I want to know how Texas responds to that because they really have not faced that at all this year. And I mentioned Michigan specifically because they jumped on them so early. That was the one definitive road game that they've had this season that they've looked really, really good. But that was also back in September. That's a different football team. I'm not worried about the team that played there. I'm worried about the team that is playing right now. You mentioned the injury to Quinn Ewers. I've mentioned the question marks that they have on the road, that's still probably the most complete football team in the SEC. Let's be very clear about that. This very well could be the best chance that the SEC has to winning a national championship. Now, they've also had this cupcake schedule that they've surfed through. So who are they? We're going to find out a whole hell of a lot about Texas. But Texas A&M, I think we know definitively who they are. They're a team that plays really well at home. They're a team that does not travel super well. Now, this game is happening at Kyle Field. Let's see what they can do here. Marcel Reed, I need to see a little bit more from him. I need to see a little bit more consistency. The struggles that he had with turnovers and everything else, that team should not have gotten out to such a slow start. I understand you're playing on the road at Jordan-Hare Stadium. It's haunted, like Nick Saban likes to say. It's a tough place to play. Well, you're playing at home now, so that excuse isn't going to carry. You need to play a better football game. You need to start out faster. This is a team that's had some pretty serious deficits over the course of the regular season, some too big for them to get out of. The Auburn one they did get out of. They got to overtime, but they dug too deep of a trench, and they couldn't get over the hump in overtime. South Carolina, similar situation. You got into a big hole. You couldn't get out. Fortunately, you got out against LSU, and you had that incredible second half. But the thing is, you bench Connor Wegman and sometime around that third quarter, and then you have Marcel Reed, and that's all people talked about. Everybody seemingly forgot about that Texas A&M team that got into that early hole. So this team has some glaring issues. I wonder what their secondary is going to do against Quinn Ewers if he's able to go, or even Arch Manning for that matter. If they're able to, if the passing attack for Texas is humming, I don't think Texas A&M is going to be able to slow it down too well. But even if you're at home, that crowd can be sucked out of it if Texas gets an early lead. That is where I'm going to be watching this game early on in the contest, because if it's tight late or even up past halftime, that's where I'm going to get very interested in to see how Texas deals with the crowd and deals with everything else. Any more comments on this one, Mr. Gordon?
Yeah, I thought you said something really interesting about Texas and their schedule, and I just want to say something based on that. The fact that Texas has an easy schedule thus far doesn't really prove or disprove how good they are or are not. It only limits the amount of source material you have to make that decision. They could still be one of the best teams in the country with the schedule that they have. We just haven't seen them tested enough. And I think that's an interesting aspect.
Yeah, very similar to what we said about Indiana, and the same thing we said about, well, really against Clemson, teams like that, a team that we're going to talk about here in just a second. There are a lot of teams that have kind of surfed through the easy part of your schedule, and that's what you're supposed to do. But we'll continue discussion about those other teams here in just a moment. But this is a great game. Texas 5-point road favorite in this contest. I think the ramifications of this game could not be more overstated. I mean, this is a great football game, and this is going to make for a fantastic evening. What's up?
Let me just ask you, because I have this thought process. I want to see if you agree. And we just saw Indiana lose and still be ranked in the top 10. If Texas loses, are they still a playoff team? Are they still ranked?
I say no.
Okay, I say no. They would fall out. I'm just asking.
I think the loser of this game is going to get eliminated from the college football playoff.
Okay,
should.
Just checking.
Should. Yeah. Will they? No, I don't think they will. The committee's not going to have the gall to knock them out from 3 all the way to 13 or something. I mean, it would take some unbelievable things to happen.
Well, you put yourself in a weird position where if then Georgia beats Texas A&M, Texas is out, you might only get 2 SEC teams in. I don't see that happening necessarily.
Yeah,
either.
It's not happening. It's not going to happen. But it's like if you're going to sit there and look me square in the face and tell me that you should leave, any SEC fan I'm talking to, not you, but any SEC fan, if you're going to look me square in the face and tell me that because Indiana lost to Ohio State, they should have been knocked out of the playoff before all of the chaos that happened in the SEC, all of that notwithstanding. But if you're going to look me square in the face and tell me that, and then tell me that Texas belongs in the SEC or belongs in the college football playoff, because they played in the SEC and they have 2 lost. Well, they lost the only 2 meaningful games that they played against meaningful competition. And you cannot don't spit in my face and tell me it's rain. That's all I'm going to ask you to do. So I don't think that they're going to drop him, to answer your question. But should they? Yes, they absolutely should, because this is a Texas team that has not really been tested at all, and you should have to answer to that in some regard. Will they? It's not going to happen. All right, let's move into another big game with some big ramifications. Huge rivalry game, lots of rivalry games throughout the course of this weekend. My favorite weekend of the year. One of my favorite games, kicking off at noon Eastern time, the game. And it's a game that one team has dominated over the last 3 years. That team is going to be suiting up. The jerseys are, but the team that's been dominating is not going to be in attendance here. Michigan is going to get annihilated in this football game. I honestly believe that Ryan Day is going to lay the wood in this one. And it's going to get ugly, and it's going to get ugly fast, because Chip Kelly and this offense, they're going to get cooking. I think that's really the biggest inflection point in this game, is how much success can Chip Kelly, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, and the rest of this, Jeremiah Smith, the rest of that offense have against what I think is the biggest strength of this Michigan team, is its defensive line. I think that secondary, especially with the health of Will Johnson notwithstanding, it's gettable. It's gettable. So that's where I'm going to be looking at this game to see the biggest mover for Michigan, because you're going to have to score on defense with defensive scores. You're going to have to score with special teams. It's not going to happen on offense. This offense is dreadful. It's one of the worst in all of college football. They don't move the ball against pedestrian defenses. You're not going to move the ball against Jim Knowles and this defense. It's not going to happen. It's going to get ugly. And look, credit to Ryan Day. He said at one point, I don't know if it's a press conference, I saw this on social media. He said, besides the death of his father, the last 3 years, what Michigan has done has been the most taxing thing on his life. And that just shows how important this rivalry game is to the people in Ohio State. And people who think that that's kind of an overreaction, you just don't know college football and you don't know this rivalry. It means a lot, and it's going to be kind of an ugly game. It's a 21-point spread. Take the Buckeyes to cover.
Yeah, I'm not going to waste time with what's going on the field. We know that Ohio State's better than Michigan. The story of this game is Ryan Day getting over that hump of Michigan. It's a home game. They have the better team. There's absolutely no excuses this time around. They need to win this game. The X's and O's are going to take care of itself. whatever you just said about the matchups, fine. Like Ohio State's the better team. No one's going to sit here and disagree with that. So they need to go ahead and win this game. It's a massive game, obviously. And Ohio State ought to win, but you're just waiting to see Ryan Day finally get that little monkey off his back, get a little pressure off of him as well.
Yeah, and one other big thing is anybody who says that Ohio State might be looking past this game, no, they're not.
No.
First off. Second off, they haven't clinched the Big Ten championship game. Everyone assumes that last week was the clincher against Indiana. They have not clinched. They have not clinched. If they lose, they're not in. So,
by the way, do you know how that works? Like, how have they not clinched? Because they have head-to-heads over – I don't understand the tiebreakers because they have head-to-head over Penn State and over
total
Indiana.
Losses. It's total losses. If they lose, it would be their second loss.
Right. I was looking past that part. Yeah.
Yep. They lost to Oregon earlier in the season, so that would be their second loss in the Big Ten. And Penn State.
So then it would be either Indiana or Penn State if they lost. Okay.
Which at that point, I don't know. The Big Ten has done a masterful job of having.
I want to see either of those games.
Avoid
I want to see either of those games.
Oh no, Oregon's clinched. Oregon is in. It's just who they are going to be playing that is up for debate. And look, this game I think is going to get ugly. And Ryan Day, this has been your boogeyman for the last 3 years, and it's the reason people are talking about firing here. No one would be talking about firing Ryan Day. Maybe a couple closeted psychopaths who sit there and are Twitter trolls or whatever. But no meaningful discussion would be had about the status of Ryan Day's job if he was to win one of the last 3 games that they played. But since he's been struggling in the way that he has, this is the discussion, and this is the discussion we're going to continue to have until he gets over the hump. Let's move down to South Carolina, where we have a disagreement where the primary school in South Carolina is. One is in Columbia, one is in Clemson. And I know that Dabo Swinney had some comments specifically about how they are where South Carolina football is played. Okay, sure. Well, now you have a chance to prove it. It was kind of ugly the last 2 years, and South Carolina was the benefactor in one, Clemson the benefactor in the other. This is a muck-it-up type of rivalry game where these two teams absolutely hate each other. And that's the beautiful thing about this whole week. They all hate each other. And I think this is an extremely compelling matchup for multiple reasons. Off of the football field, it's going to be a potential play-in game between two teams who are looking to get involved or invited to an AC or to the college football playoff. And Clemson, you just got to you're waiting. As far as the ACC championship game is concerned, South Carolina is way too far away for you to get there. But both of these teams are within striking distance. Both are outside looking in as it stands right now. But if you look, you win this game in a definitive fashion, that might be enough to convince the playoff committee that you belong in that final field of 12. You got to make that one of those 7 at-large bids. You're going to need a little bit of help. But if you can look definitive in this football game, I think you'll give yourself a good opportunity. Who is Clemson? Because you look at the 2 best teams that they've played this season, and they got waxed by both of them, Louisville and Georgia. Everybody else outside of that, dreadful competition. And you kind of got fat on that if you're Clemson. I want to see what they can do against meaningful competition. What are they going to do when somebody is bearing down on them, Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard and that defensive unit on that defensive line? What do they look like in that instance? I'm fascinated for this game. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I cannot wait. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, fascinating is the proper word here from a multitude of angles, both in terms of what's going to take place on the field, but also what's going to take place in front of the committee in the discussion. I am hard-pressed to say that the winner of this game belongs in the 12-team field. Clemson is certainly in great position if they win. But even South Carolina, I think they jump Alabama, they jump Ole Miss, and they find themselves in position as well. So I do think a playoff spot is on the line, although I know some people may disagree. You may think that they're going to take Alabama over South Carolina anyways. It'll be interesting to see. But, of course, South Carolina's got to handle business in this one. And I agree with you, man. Like, that defensive front that South Carolina has, Clemson normally has the best defensive front on the field. They didn't against Georgia, and I'm not sure they're going to in this
Yeah.
game either. And that goes to serve two purposes, right? It can slow down Phil Maffa and the run game, which really never got going the way we thought it potentially could this year to begin with.
Did at times.
No, I meant just over the course of the season. Yeah.
Yeah.
Game to game, sure, but really, it wasn't the mainstay we thought it could be. And then also, it's obviously going to affect Cade Klubnik. And so for South Carolina, you got to hope your defense can create some issues, because Clemson, I think, is going to keep you out of the end zone to a decent extent. I don't think we're going to be seeing Lenore Sellers match his school record 5 touchdowns this coming Saturday. But Rocket Sanders, we've continually talked about him. He's picked it up and up and up, and he's gotten better since about week 5, week 6 of the season. He's got their offense going. So they need to do a little bit on offense, but kind of let that defense go to work. And I think if you're Clemson, you would probably feel the same way. If Maffa or Klubnik can get 1 or 2 touchdown drives and then let your defense go to work. It's very interesting. I would say this with hesitation. Like, it feels like it's got potential to be 17-13 or something lower scoring. Now that I've said that, it's definitely going to be 31-28 and the offenses are rocking. But very interesting matchup. And it just feels like the winner has a playoff spot. It's going to be, certainly if it's Clemson, for sure. But even if it's South Carolina, I think the committee is going to have to take a look and say, how much do we weigh head-to-heads and good losses, bad losses, wins versus just the pure record versus what we're seeing and how teams are playing at the end of the season. It's going to be interesting to see that discussion when it comes out.
Yeah, and look, South Carolina, you can talk about your good losses or whatever. You still have 3 of them. I mean, that's going to be a potential killer for them. And look, we're talking about 3 lost teams as if they deserve or don't deserve blank. It is what it is. And you had your 2 losses to Alabama and to LSU came by a combined 5 points, but it's still head to head. And it's still meaningful, especially when you're looking ahead at 2 teams who beat you. Look, I mean, Ole Miss is in front of them and Alabama's in front of them so far in the college football playoff rankings. So that's worth keeping an eye on. Would a win against Clemson be enough to put you over the top? That's where I have some questions. But look, you mentioned Lenore Sellers. I mean, the beautiful thing about what he's been doing, and again, I don't expect him to throw for 5 touchdowns in this game necessarily, but he started playing cleaner football, and that's been very important for him. It's been more important for Rocket Sanders and everybody else in this offense. But when he's playing at his best, Lenore Sellers, when the offense can be funneled through him, everybody else seems to shine. And that's where this offense is really effective, and it's where it's really scary. But like I mentioned, I think this game is going to be won and lost on the defensive side of the ball for South Carolina. Clemson, you got to find a way to stop that defensive front. But if you're Clemson, you're just kind of hoping to get a win here, and then all eyes are going to shift over to a game up in against Syracuse and Miami, and you need Syracuse to go and get a win there if you want to have a chance to go play for an ACC championship game, and that would be more of a de facto stamp of approval for the Clemson Tigers. But as far as that large bids are concerned, I think neither of these teams really control their fate. They're both on the outside looking in. We're assuming that a win here, a definitive win, would be enough to sway the playoff committee to try and push them in that direction. That remains to be seen. But let's move over here. It's Notre Dame and it's USC. One of the few real tests for Notre Dame this season. They have not been tested a whole lot this year. They've done a really good job, and they feasted on the schedule that they have played. We talked about them rolling against Army last week. It was really just a quick mention at that point because there wasn't much to talk about. It was the same thing that they've done pretty much throughout the course of the regular season against inferior competition. This was one of those games where we expected to get a little bit more pushback. The USC Trojans, they've gone off the rails. I mean, this is a team that they're just not a very good team. Lincoln Riley, if his buyout wasn't as big as it is, people would be having a lot more serious conversations about a potential buyout there and a potential firing. It's been very disappointing for USC this season, their first year in the Big Ten. But look, you can flip the script pretty quickly against Notre Dame. And this is a team that if you go and get a win here in this game, then it changes the fortunes very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, look, Notre Dame's in the situation where they're in. With this game, they're in. But without this game, you're out. We'll see you next year. It is as big for them as any of these other games we've talked about. It is win and you're in, lose and you're out. There's no doubt about that. And I'll tell you this, man. Like I was watching that Army game. Notre Dame might be the most physical, hard hitting team in the entire country. I'm not saying that they have the best players in the country, but just in terms of pure, like, man, you hear the crunch of the pads on every single play. I don't think there's a team that does that more than Notre Dame. And I also think that they are starting and have started to kind of unleash the Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love combo in the backfield. And their offense is starting to match what their defense has been doing most of the year. They haven't had the toughest schedule in the world. I think we understand that. And USC can jump out at you. It's a long road trip. It's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. But man, coming off of that high of what was supposed to be built up as a big challenge for Notre Dame with Army and their ranking and the undefeated season, all that stuff. Just got to make sure you're there emotionally. That's the one big concern I would have is an emotional letdown. I think that the fact that you are in a rivalry game maybe helps protect you from that, but you got to ramp it up 2 weeks in a row. We'll see if they can do that because they get that offense cooking combined with what that defense can do. And then also, to be fair, combined with the severe limitations of USC this year on
Yeah.
both sides of the ball, but more specifically on offense. I look for Notre Dame to go ahead and cinch their spot in the playoffs. And boy, they have had a very good season since that Northern Illinois loss. You can't ignore that. That game happened,
No.
but like we've at times talked about like, hey, are you talking about like what Clemson has done since they lost to Georgia? They're blowing out anyone. Have you talked about what Indiana's doing? They're blowing out everyone. Like that's what Notre Dame is doing. Like they have just been blowing out teams in recent weeks. It's been very impressive. I think they are one of the better teams in the country, but they have to prove it one more time before selection of the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, you go up and down the schedule. This is just the type of schedule that they've just been able to lean on their competition, and they can't really push back. Uh, I mean, it's Navy, it's Florida State, it's Virginia, Army, Georgia Tech was playing without several key starters in that game. Stanford. The last real test that this team had was Louisville, which is a top 30 team, and I think they looked okay in that game. And the final score was 31-24, but it's a game that was a little bit more lopsided than the score might have indicated. Louisville scored late in that game to kind of cut into that lead and make it a little bit closer than really it was. I think Notre Dame was definitively the better football team. But outside of that, they have not been tested one time since the Texas A&M game. And I think a lot of water is being carried by that win. It was a 23-13 win to week one, way back in August, not even September, way back in the schedule. And outside of that, it's like that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Because then you go and lose to Northern Illinois, and we've just completely and totally forgotten about that. If not me, I remember it and I mention it constantly, but the committee seemingly has completely forgotten about it. By courtesy of their top 5 ranking, right? They came in at number 5, didn't they? Yeah. Are we really going to give the 5th ranking to the team that lost to Northern Illinois earlier this season? Yeah, because they've looked that good against their competition throughout the course of the season. But the other big note that I want to make here about Notre Dame before we move on, this is only their 3rd true road game. And the other 2, Texas A&M, like I mentioned, that was a big win for them, but it takes a little bit more of a hit if Texas rolls Texas A&M this weekend. That'd be a 4-loss SEC team. That's your best win of the season, by the way. Then it's Purdue, and you did that September 14th. It's been a long time for Notre Dame. They have not really played in a lot of hostile environments. Now, I don't know how hostile USC is really going to be. This is a team that, isn't really playing good football right now, and the people in Los Angeles have a lot of other things that they're going to be focusing on potentially than Notre Dame and USC. So, but we'll see. I mean, like this is still a rivalry game, and if the USC fans get up and they can make this a hostile environment for Notre Dame, I want to see how they react to it. Because I don't think Notre Dame is really going to play a single hostile environment this season outside of that Texas A&M game all season, because if you go and win this game, they're going to host a playoff game in round one. They're going to host, and it just depends on where they end up hosting or who they end up hosting. But credit to them. The schedule's worked out in their favor, and they had a couple of teams on here who were supposed to present some more problems for them, like Florida State. You're talking about USC in this one, Louisville earlier this season, but it just ended up being that way. But they should roll this game. They should continue to play at a high level. But rivalry games happen, and this is a very historic game for a reason. Let's go back to the ACC. Another big one, Miami and Syracuse. This is an important game for several reasons. If you're Miami, you're looking at a potential do I belong at large type of bid, but also you need to clinch your spot for an ACC championship game. Kyle McCord and Syracuse might have something to say about it. Hopefully, Fran Brown is still washing himself with soap, but if he goes and wins this game, he certainly will, and maybe he'll upgrade, gets a body wash or something like that. But what are your thoughts on this one, Abe?
Yeah, I mean, look, just two quick things. These are two of the most prolific passing offenses, not in the ACC, in the entire country. And we've already seen Miami, when they get into some of these shootouts, need a big fourth quarter. And the way Kyle McCord is spinning it right now, don't fall behind by a lot. That would be my suggestion. I think this is a real danger spot for Miami to play their way out of the playoff seeding. I mean, they're in position right now. They could avoid the ACC title game. If they can win this game and avoid the title game, they seem like they would be a lock. So, yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. But I do think this is another danger spot for them.
Yeah, I mean, this is a must-win game for Miami for multiple reasons. Obviously, if you want to make the playoff and clinch your spot in the ACC championship game, but for the ACC as a whole, they need Miami to win this game, because I think if you are, especially if Clemson loses, the nightmare scenario for the ACC is Syracuse wins and South Carolina wins. And then SMU loses to whoever. I guess in that instance, it would be Clemson. If Clemson then wins the ACC championship, because at that point, you're looking at SMU likely left out based off of where they were seated. Fair or not, they would likely be left out of the field. If you want to have two teams, your best recourse is a one-loss Miami team versus a one-loss SMU team. And then maybe you get two teams just because of all the chaos and the way that the SEC kind of punched itself and shot itself in the foot. So Syracuse, watch out for this team. I've been saying that for months now. Watch out for Syracuse. This is a game I've had circled for a very long time. And Miami's had a habit of kind of just floating. And it finally burned them against Georgia Tech. They weren't able to come back in that game. This is another team that you may not be able to come back on. Syracuse might feast on this decrepit Miami defense. Same can be said about Miami. Both teams are going to be able to throw the ball at will. There are going to be some fireworks in this one. And you talk about the ramifications for all parties involved. This is a must-watch game. It's an 8-win, very quietly, an 8-win team for Syracuse and Fran Brown in his first season. They've had some lows this season, and they've also had some pretty big highs. I'm very interested in this one. Should be a lot of fun there. Let's shoot out to the Big 12. Kansas State and Iowa State, two teams who have had a bit of a disappointing run, but Iowa State still has a chance to play in a Big 12 championship. They are a part of a multi-way tie for first place. It's a 14 tie right now. So Iowa State, you got to win. You just got to win. And that is effectively where you stand right now, because you have the win against Colorado earlier in the season. I want to say, I can't remember, but no, this is you just got to win this football game.
Yeah, now look, this one is, I don't know what's happened with Iowa State, because Avery Johnson is just so hot and cold, it doesn't make sense. They still got Giddens, who's a heck of a player, but he just doesn't seem to have an impact on the game sometimes the way that the stats would show. He goes for $140, and you're like, all right, well, they just still didn't feel like they were dangerous offensively. I don't really know how that happens, but sometimes it does. For Iowa State, just keep doing what you're doing. And that has been a game plan of ride Cam Scatterboo and let Becht beat you when he needs to. They've been very good in play action. They've gotten guys open downfield, wide open multiple times over the last couple of weeks here. I'm sorry. We're talking about Iowa State. I flipped on you and switched to Arizona State. I
Okay,
combined
what
multiple
happened?
teams. I combined
I got
multiple
confused there.
teams, multiple players. Too many teams are still involved in the Big 12, and now I'm getting
True.
confused.
Yeah, I also just said that Iowa State played Colorado. No, Kansas State played Colorado. I'm
too many
kind
teams
of a
still
product of
involved.
I'm a product of my chilly environment right here, and I'm like just yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, no. Look, it's a situation with two teams who are still fighting and need other results. And for Iowa State, they're obviously in a better seat right now, better position than Kansas State. But yeah, look, the whole story of the season in the Big 12 to me is what happened to Kansas State, because I know they lost to BYU. I still thought they were one of the better teams, not just in the Big 12, but one of the better teams in the country. They've completely fallen apart in recent weeks. Even in games that they've ended up winning, they've fallen apart. And so I'm whether or not they can get that back and make me feel the same way about them, I don't think so. And then Iowa State was the story of their season was like everything's right in front of us, and then all of a sudden, no, it's not. And so they've had to regroup over the last couple of weeks to try and get back on track and hopefully find a way into the playoffs. And I'll be honest, like I've had this interesting thought going on now after seeing the latest college football playoff rankings. I'm not sure the Big 12 champion's a lock.
I've been saying it for weeks.
Yeah,
saying it for weeks.
I think where they rank Tulane, you might want to be careful there. And it'll be interesting to see if the Big 12 gets left with 0 teams in this tournament. That's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, you talk about that rage index. I've been talking about it for a few weeks now. Everyone's just assuming that the Big 12 champion is going to make it. No, they're not. If they continue to F around, they will find out. And I don't think the committee is afraid of leaving the Big 12 out. They've done it several times in the 4-team era. But that's a different discussion, obviously, for a different time. But look, the Big 12 has not done a lot to separate itself from the AAC necessarily, at least at the top. If Tulane continues to win, I think that they might have something to say. Now, Kansas State is the only team in that conference that would have something as far as the head-to-head is concerned. But I mean, ultimately, I'm looking at the schedule that these guys are potentially playing, and like I don't know, Arizona State I think is your best shot right now because of what happened to Colorado last week. I thought Colorado was going to be your best shot outside of BYU, the one-loss BYU team. But when Arizona State took down BYU, you I think talk about their resume differently than everybody else, just because you have the one loss that came when you didn't have your starting quarterback. So I think that's where you kind of hark on them, I guess. But Iowa State's a team that still has a chance to play into the Big 12 championship. That's the biggest point in this game. Kansas State and Avery Johnson. Let's just see how they can lean into this Iowa State defense that is susceptible against the run. But Kansas State just has not looked super effective, or at least consistent throughout the course of this season. But this is just a chaos factor game, and that's why I have it on the schedule. But another chaos factor game that we're just kind of looping around. I'm kind of just looping all these two big Big 12 games in together. Arizona and Arizona State. This is a game that Arizona is still a good enough football team that they can throw a wrench into somebody's schedule, and they would love nothing more than to ruin Ryan Dillingham's magical season in the Big 12. If they can do it, Arizona State would be on the outside looking in of the Big 12 championship game. But if you're Scatterboo, if you leave it, all these other guys, just play your game, and you should be able to get a win here in this one.
Yeah, and look, I think your defense is good enough where you do not want this to turn into a shootout with Arizona. We know what they can do at times offensively with McMillan and Fafita and some of those guys. Ride Scatterboo, ride Leavitt when you need him, but minimize possessions and let the defense do its work. Keep from giving up big plays to Arizona. I think you could ride this one out even on the road.
Yeah, it's one of those types of games. I mean, you look at BYU and what they did last week with Arizona State. They said that they were going to slow down Tyson. No, you didn't. The two wide receivers in this game, I think, are the most interesting. This is the most, as far as wide, obviously don't play each other, but the wide receiver versus wide receiver matchup here. Tyson and McMillan. These are two of the most electric wide receivers in college football. With McMillan, I'd say he's got a claim as being the best wide receiver in college football. But then you got a true freshman in Levitt. I mean, can he continue to roll? It's an Arizona team that's kind of let their season go wonky, especially in recent weeks, but you still have strong performances down the stretch. You have what they did against Houston. So keep an eye out on this team. This is not a team that's just going to roll over in this one. But Arizona's just had a disappointing season. Doesn't mean that they can't turn it around and turn it around in a hurry. But you talk about hate. The Iron Bowl is very high on the list of hate. And you have two teams who are entering this game on two completely different levels, both in terms of win-loss record and in terms of what they did last week and their mentality heading into this game. On one hand, you have Jalen Milroe and this Alabama team that's entering on the lowest of lows because of what they just did over in Norman, Oklahoma. They effectively had their entire season just thrown off the rails because of that performance. Probably the worst I've seen Alabama in a very, very long time. That was an ugly performance in an ugly football game where you don't score an offensive touchdown in that game. It was decrepit. It was bad. I'll save all the adjectives for a later time. But this is still a game where you have something to prove and you can still go get a win and keep yourself around right now. And if Alabama wins this game, there's an outside chance that they can get kind of pushed in and be like that 11 seed or something like that. Is that fair? No, I don't think so. I don't think they deserve it at 3 losses, especially the 3 losses that they've had. But it's an Alabama team that their consistent issue outside of that game that they played against LSU is that they're just not a very good team on the road. They're not a very good team on the road. So fortunately for them, this game is going to be happening at Bryant-Denny Stadium. There are confines over there in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But if you're Auburn, you're coming in here, you're riding very high because Peyton Thorne played the best game that he has played as an Auburn Tiger. They didn't turn the ball over. That's the thing that we've been shouting from the mountaintops on this podcast. Just play a clean game. Play a clean game and see what can happen. Well, you beat Texas A&M in 4 overtimes, and you dropped 40 points in that game. That's what can happen. So I don't know if people are more happy or frustrated with what they just saw from Auburn, but point is they got a big win, a marquee win last week. And if you can get a marquee win again this week over Alabama, that'll be a feather in the cap of Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, they just can't figure it out. Alabama just cannot figure out what team they're going to be on a given day, given week, a given month. It feels like they could be competing for the national championship. It also feels like anyone can get them at this point. Certainly Auburn coming off of a nice win against Texas A&M is going to be riding high. I think we saw some of their best performance of the season was last week, and they can carry that momentum in. It still is going to boil down to the same thing. Alabama needs to hit big plays. At this point, I don't even care how it happens. If it's Jalen Milroe with his legs, then fine. If it's Ryan Williams or someone else down the field, so be it. But they have got to hit big plays, and they are just not being able to sustain drives. Jalen Milroe is not playing clean, smart, safe football, and people are panicking there with Kalen DeBoer. Potential of missing the playoffs in his first season. That could become a certainty if they don't win this one.
Yeah, and that puts obviously there's no hot seat conversation for Kalen DeBoer. You lose this game, it's a 4-loss season in Tuscaloosa. That is not going to carry a lot of weight with that donor base. They will get very antsy very quickly. And look, it's a good football team. I don't think there's any denying that fact, but it's just an inconsistent one. You just need to see a little bit more of that on a game-to-game basis, week to week. That's what's just so mind-numbing to me. Like the team that just blasted LSU. Where are they? What happened to that team? What happened to the team that did what they did against Missouri? It's just so weird to me, and it's the fact that the aura of Nick Saban has, I think, with what you did in Norman, the aura of Nick Saban's gone, and people just need to come to terms with the fact that this is just a different football team, and for better or for worse, you got to move on, and I don't know who Alabama is on any given week. It's hard to predict what they're going to do on any given week, but you got to show up for this one. You got to show up for this one because the stakes cannot be higher for either of these teams. Alabama's playing for their playoff life, and Hugh Freeze is just looking for that marquee win. He would love nothing more than to throw a wrench into their season, but they're also looking for bowl eligibility. That's a big, big deal for a program like Auburn that's trying to rebuild that program into something that they know it can be. So keep an eye on that one. Last one here for you. Clean Old Fashioned 8. This one on Friday night, a Friday night edition, Black Friday. This is going to be a lot of fun just because I love this game. We're from the state of Georgia. We know how big of a rivalry this is. I covered the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. There's been a lot of conversation this week about how much they hate the University of Georgia. Nothing changes. It's 365 days a year that they continually say, what's the good word? And the answer, to hell with Georgia. It's a big rivalry game for them. People were asking Kirby Smart about whether or not it's a big rivalry game for them. He says, yeah. I mean, there are people from out of state who didn't grow up in Georgia and don't understand it fully. But lose this game, and you'll learn very quickly how meaningful it is. So as far as the game itself, Georgia needs this win. They need to continue that. They've won 6 games in a row, I believe. And they need to win this one to just sort of continue coasting and give themselves a definitive, I don't want to say a bye week, a definitive in to the college football playoff. If they win this game and then lose the SEC championship, say to Texas or whatever, I think they're still in the college football playoff. However, if you lose this game, then you have to go win that SEC title game next week. Can Georgia Tech do it? They're doing it with a 2-quarterback system right now. It hasn't really been super effective. Last week against NC State on a Thursday night, worked great against Miami. I would be very surprised if they try to roll out the exact same thing that they did against NC State. It wasn't really working and drives were stalling out. You're not going to find that level of success against this Georgia defense on the road. Aaron Philo, can you turn to him? A true freshman starter? I don't know. I don't know if he's ready for that kind of environment that he's going to be walking into. Both of his last 2 performances came at home, and that may have an impact on him. Just playing on the road in the SEC is a different beast, especially in a rivalry game. So as far as the Georgia Tech side, they've got a path to victory, just got to play clean football, force a couple turnovers of their own. Maybe Carson Beck turns it over once or twice, and you could be a benefactor of that, but you got to finish drives. It's a program that in recent weeks, against Miami, they did a good job of it, but in other games, they have not. You have to be able to finish drives with touchdowns, not with field goals. Abe, what you got?
Yeah, a couple of things here. Georgia, all of a sudden on offense, has started to play clean football. And I get that one of those was against UMass, and understandably so. But we've seen Carson Beck make mistakes against teams that are not very good either way. But going back to that game against Tennessee, clean football on offense, and then against UMass, can they do that a third straight game? If they play clean, I'm sorry, I just don't think there's much that Georgia Tech can do to beat them. But
no,
we've also seen Carson Beck revert and make mistakes at times. And if Georgia Tech can capitalize on that, then there we go. I also think Georgia Tech is in great position to kind of pull the wool over the eyes of the Georgia Bulldogs on defense. They've, and I've talked with you about this, the predictability of Haynes King running and Aaron Philo throwing. We saw Aaron Philo run a little bit in that game-winning drive against NC State. I think we've seen at times Haynes King throw a little bit. Can they use what might be viewed as predictability as a little switcheroo advantage? We'll see if they can find some big plays by doing something like that. But quite frankly, with the respect to the win over Miami, Georgia Tech has to play their best football game of the season, and they have to do it on the road in a rivalry game against a team that has better players. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but the task is there. And for Georgia, you certainly want to be trending up as you head into the SEC title game. You would like to see them play with a strong performance. And so we'll see if that can happen. Need to see more out of the run game from Georgia. We've been waiting all year. They finally got a 100-yard rusher. Nate Frazier went over the century mark against UMass. Can they do something like that? Doesn't even have to be 100. Just get something out of your run game and a little bit more out of your receivers, and you could be cooking heading into the SEC title game.
Yeah, another thing to keep an eye on, Jamal Haynes, that rushing attack for Georgia Tech it's a bit boom or bust. It was more bust against NC State, but it was certainly a boom against Miami. It kind of rides this wave right up here, and against a Georgia defense that just gave up 226 yards to UMass. maybe they could be licking their chops at the prospect of running against this unit. It's shown at times to be susceptible. It's not that normal Georgia defense that's going to pound and knock you out. But I also think that because it was UMass, I think Georgia was a little bit asleep at the wheel going into that game. So we'll see if that has any carryover effect. I know the Georgia Tech is going to want to establish the run. It's an icon of or a major key, no pun intended, for Brent Key. If he wants to run the ball and he wants to establish that, I think he's what is it? I can't remember the exact stat. I'm not going to throw it at you, but this is a very important game for Brent Key. I know he's talked at length about how important it is to beat Georgia as the head coach of Georgia Tech. This is a program that hasn't done it effectively over the last 24 years. All of that can change very quickly, and it changes 1 year at a time. So Georgia Tech, this is a big game for them. Georgia, it's just another hurdle. You got to get through it, and you got to win this game. You have to win this game if you are the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia Tech, it just kind of be a feather in your cap. Abe, it was fun. Had a lot of fun up here in the chilly city of Nashville at an undisclosed location. And I love it. We'll be back here again over the weekend. And we're going to have our reaction show. Of course, it's going to be a huge, huge show. So make sure you tune in for that one. It'll be appointment listening. So make sure to jump in here and give us a follow at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon. Follow the podcast, the College Football Overtime Podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and tell your friends. Tell them, send it over, share it, and we'll just talk all things college football. It's what we love to do, and we are so glad that you joined us. Reaction show coming up later on this weekend, so keep an eye out for that one. Plus, the College Football Playoff Committee, they will have a full body of work to take a look at, and we will know who our top 12 teams are going to be. Very excited. Well, at least we'll have a better idea of what that's going to be. So we'll get you ready for all of that and more. This is the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. We will see you again very soon.